This feature, The Future of Housing, is funded by the News Reporting Scheme.
And the Future of Housing will deliver sustained, in-depth reporting on housing in County Clare to provide clarity, context and accountability. Each week we're examining a different aspect of the housing crisis, from supply and pricing trends to planning permission barriers, social housing allocations, mortgage access and the role of sustainable rural building, answering the key questions. This week's focus is on housing and community sustainability with Michael Vaughan, the owner of Vaughan's Lodge in Lahinch, and Mary O'Donoghue, coordinator of the West Clare Family Resource Centre, looking at how housing affects village life, services and population retention. You're both very welcome to Morning Focus and the Future of Housing. I might start with yourself, Michael. Can you talk to us about how important the availability is of housing in Lahinch when it comes to attracting and also keeping staff for local businesses such as your own?
It's vital, really, and you know it's one of the big drawbacks we have at the moment is that there actually is no housing available. Generally speaking, I was interviewing a young lady for a job during the week. And the big difficulty she had was that she was being asked to leave the accommodation she's had for the last 6 months because they're going to rent an Airbnb for the summer, and she's wondering where she will get a place to stay. And I honestly couldn't. I don't provide accommodation. It's just gone beyond what's reasonable to build at the moment. I would have land to build, but I just couldn't afford to build accommodation, and there isn't accommodation available for that. And you know, even if you talk about generally speaking from a village life point of view, the hollowing out of the central core of population in places like Lahinch has a detrimental effect on the overall quality of life in the village throughout the year.
Okay, we might discuss that a little bit further later on. But that lack of housing for staff, has that led to significant changes in recent years in terms of where your staff are living or how far they have to travel because of housing shortages?
Well, generally speaking, I'd like to hire local people because I think it's a great opportunity for young people to get their first opportunity in front of people and public, and they get great confidence from working in hospitality. So that's where we start. But generally, I would have people travelling up from Coor, beyond Milton Malbay for work. I'd have people, a lady looking for work up beyond Kinvara, Corrafin. Very rarely now do I get anybody that's within the confines of Lahinch because generally speaking they're more interested in the surfer jobs and jobs in the pubs, so a hotel like mine wouldn't be attractive. But you just can't. I would have any amount of people from all over the country available to work if there was accommodation.
Okay, so that is understandably a source of frustration. Mary, you're out the same side of the county. From the families you work with at the West Clare Family Resource Centre, how big a challenge is housing availability in West Clare from your perspective?
I would say it's actually one of the biggest, I suppose, challenges that exists today. I mean, housing availability is a real barrier to stability, growth and well-being for families in West Clare. And there is really a very limited year-round rental supply. There is high dereliction, vacancy, you know. There is also rising rents, which we've, even in this last year, they're just going sky high. And there's a very long social housing waiting lists, and there's insufficient new builds. And that's a reality, and it has been a reality for the last 10, 15, 20 years, you know, and it isn't getting better. We'll acknowledge that there's some houses being built, but there isn't enough. And they're not meeting the needs that people have. So, like, you know, we can talk about affordability of houses, both from a rental perspective or buying, whichever, are going way beyond people's means. They just don't have it. We know in West Clare there's quite a limited, I suppose, disposable income available to people. There is the lack of supply is huge, and you know, what do we look to that? I mean, there's a rise in Airbnb short-term letting, and there is a huge decrease in long-term rental. More and more people are being forced into the rental market. I think we look at this and we look at our communities. You know, there was always a push in Ireland, I suppose, to own your house. You know, that is gone. You know, more and more people are renting. But private rental was only ever seen as a stopgap. And at one stage it was like that for seasonal workers, for young people maybe that were just out of home for a little while and all of that. But now what we're seeing is People are renting for their whole lifetimes, and there is a huge amount of insecurity attached to that. It's having a detrimental effect on families. Now we have families who've been in B&Bs for over a year with their children. No way to, I mean, how can you raise a child in that kind of a situation, you know? Like, housing isn't just a right. I mean, it is a right, but it's also the thing that gives families, it gives people that stability of where they live, and that is really important. And we have to start looking at it like that, I think.
Yeah,
And we're talking about like a sustainable communities. It's a brilliant term, but what does that actually mean? We can't have thriving communities without year-round residents or people to live here year-round. So housing, in many ways, it holds the thread of holding together our rural life and rural way of being. And we have to look at the potential of not just the houses, say, in Kilrush, and it's wonderful. There are some new houses in Kilrush, but it's, outside of Kilrush, out in rural areas, out, back west, back towards Kilbaha, back to, up to Doonbeg, Clare, all the villages. Those are where we need to see more housing becoming available, because people are being forced to move out of their own communities. Yeah. And it's the young people that are being forced to move out, really.
And that is something we hear quite a lot, particularly in relation to the young people. And Michael, from a business owner's perspective, what impact does a lack of affordable housing have on the wider local economy in locations such as Lahinch? And I mean, I suppose for you, it causes you difficulties in terms of finding staff, but I would imagine most people who are staying in your hotel, they're coming from elsewhere. But I'm thinking of like pubs, restaurants, places like that in Lahinch. That must be difficult for them.
Well, it's an area, it's in North Clare, and generally speaking, we'll talk about that. There's been a huge amount of emigration of people who are in their mid-20s to mid-30s, gone to places like Australia and New Zealand, where they see a future and a possibility. Maybe sometimes they're going to try and get a deposit on a house, but I think even that's beyond the capability of people now from what accommodation is costing. And you have really the fabric of a village life. Things like you see the amalgamation of GAA clubs, and that's happening
more frequently.
More frequently, it certainly is. We see it too in parish life, in the church, and it's now, you go to churches where there are no younger generations coming along. They are about, but the whole, I think in the psyche of the people, it affects us, because we relied so many years on a sense of place. And if you're renting, you don't have the same sense of place as you have in ownership. You talk to farming families who can't afford or they can't get permission to build on their own land. And places like Lahinch, where the sewage treatment is just not available, so there have been no housing developments. And then the big problem there, you see, is if there are housing developments, that we've become a playground for the affluent and the wealthy from other areas, and everything available gets snapped up by people who want a holiday property or they have an idea, and those properties, they get used for less than about 6 or 7 weeks of the year. It's a huge drain on national resource.
Yeah, that is a point again that we've heard quite often on the show, and it makes it difficult for younger families, Mary, struggle to remain in their local communities. As Michael touched on, they see maybe a possibility of being able to get a home in Australia, wherever it might be, which means that takes them and future generations out of their locality because they just can't find suitable housing, and local areas, be it West, North Clare, wherever it might be, they wither on the vine and die.
And that is an issue, Alan, and I think we've talked about that over the last 15 years, actually. I think I was on Clare about 15 years ago talking about, young families leaving West Clare, and they haven't come back. And one of the reasons they can't come back is the lack of housing, and I think unless there's an attitudinal shift of thinking with regard to supply of housing, but also the role housing plays within our communities, then we're going to, nothing will change. Like, we have to start thinking right now that housing and the supply of housing isn't just a roof over somebody's head. It's contributing towards long-term community stability. It's creating good places and safe places for families, older people, young people, young families to live, Like when we're talking about people who are, I heard something last week or whatever the week before, intergenerational mortgages is what they're talking about now, There was a time when a cost of a house was 3 times the industrial wage. You paid off a mortgage within 20 years. It actually became, and it was achievable by a lot of people. That's gone. The Celtic Tiger has a lot to answer for. I think we're living with the legacy of the Celtic Tiger, particularly in West Clare as well, because an awful lot of the houses were snapped up. I think, Michael, you touched on it there, snapped up for second homes. I think the frustration level for an awful lot of people in West Clare is driving past houses that are only used for 3 or 4 weeks of the year. And these same people, same families that are doubling up or still living at home and who would have tried to buy the houses but were priced out of it. So those are the issues. So I suppose, again, the issues are there. The solutions, though, and where do the solutions lie? And I suppose I would be looking, and we've often talked about it, and I think we'd have talked about our, towards an anti-poverty strategy, even in Clare, that the Clare PPN, Public Participation Network, developed, and in Fair Clare as well, where we talked about the role of the local authorities. And I suppose the local authority housing was always supposed to provide secure long-term homes for people who cannot afford market rents. It was about providing stability for families, older people, and those with other needs. It was always a counterbalance to the private market. And in essence, it was a foundation for community life. Councils were encouraged to step back from direct building. And we were now reaping the effect of that. And there was a shift towards leasing and private rental. I've already mentioned that. It's just not a non-runner for creating stability for people.
Yeah.
There's an over-reliance on the private market now. It's a landlord's market. I heard of a studio out in a parish, not in a town, going for 1,100 in West Clare a month last week. It was advertised. That is actually daylight robbery. Nobody can afford it.
But the chances are that someone will be glad of it.
Oh, they will, because what do you do? So what has resulted? People are living in bad rental conditions. These are the things that have come out of it. Like there's a lot of rental property as well that's not fit for purpose, but people are afraid to open their mouths.
We had a listener on recently who was living in a place that was full of mould and damp and so on, and had issues with their landlord who I guess just felt like they didn't have to improve it because they'd probably get someone else to move in there. Never mind, I mean, we could talk forever about the impact housing availability has on local services such as schools, childcare and community supports. But maybe we'll finish with, we're trying to end on a positive note, folks. Maybe some potential solutions. And Michael, what would you like to see happen in terms of housing development to help sustain local businesses such as your own and the community?
I take great heart in a small initiative, but it is a major initiative because in Lister and Varna that's happening at the moment where there are a number of sites being developed by the County Council service sites and being offered from somewhere in the region of about 40,000 for a site. Now that's reasonable and that gives some bit of hope. Yeah. If we went on back to the times in the 70s when the great man himself, Father Harry Vaughan, did a scheme of houses up near me in Moy that were kind of a reverse mortgage. It started with a very affordable sum and then as you progressed in life it got larger as you were able to cope. But cooperative housing, we haven't really explored that enough in Clare. Ina has a great example of work that was done there with a number of great people in developing housing. More of that. I think we could be more creative in what we do and create a sense of community ownership of housing. That in itself would be a huge step forward, and I think this is the path we have to take.
There'd be a lot of people who'd agree with that. I'm sure you would as well, Mary. Final word to you. Like, what kind of housing solutions in West Clare would make the biggest difference for families, and how achievable are they?
I think the development and the building of houses and the renting of housing. So it's like cost rental homes needs to go back into the local authorities. I think the local authorities need to build the homes like 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom for larger families as well, which are here. But I would say, and I would say that if we as a community and if we as a society value actually people living within our rural areas, well, we do need to have a shift on how we provide houses, and it does need to go back more through the local authorities, which requires a shift of thinking there.
Okay, and we will be interesting to see if we see that shift of thinking at some point in the near future. A really interesting discussion, folks. Any final points anyone briefly wants to make before we wrap?
The main point I'd say is that we have the ability to do this. We have funds from the European Central Bank. We can make low interest available. What we need to do now is get the council with the communities to be able to establish and resource people to get the answers to these problems. Mary?
I'm in agreement with Michael. I think we need to be creative. We need to include the people who need the houses, so actually listening to what it is they would like as well. That is crucial. A house in a town is no good if your whole family is outside, in the country. So, I think we need to just think creatively, get the local authority thinking more creatively, and to work in partnership with communities. And our goal is to get people out of homelessness, and no family should be living in a B&B in this day and age.
So say all of us, so true. My thanks to Mary O'Donoghue there, coordinator of the West Clare Family Resource Centre and the owner of Vaughan's Lodge in Lahinch, Michael Vaughan. Folks, thanks to both of you for being part of this.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
This feature, The Future of Housing, is funded by the News Reporting Scheme.